Today, Drastic Summit has a distinct pleasure to talk with Cristina Savian. Cristina is a founder of BeWise Consultancy, as well as a pioneer and a thought leader in the area of digital twins and for buildings and structures and other things. Welcome, Cristina.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Steve.
I'm always fascinated to hear the innovators and entrepreneurs' life's journey and story. At a high level, can you give us kind of your journey in the construction industry? It's amazing.
Okay. So interesting. So my career spans across Italy, UK, and Australia. In terms of like main location. So I started my career over 20 years ago. In Italy, northern Italy, I actually qualified. I'm qualified building surveyor. That's how I started my career. I actually always been fascinated more by infrastructure, especially beginning of my career in open spaces. So I actually started working as a land surveyor in northern Italy, working the design on some of the big one of the big freeways in northern Italy. Worked a lot in traffic management and the local council, then went to UK, London, worked for quite a few years in one of the local authorities there, Greenwich Council, doing a lot of traffic management schemes and parking, control parking zones. Worked for the London Olympics for 2012. I was one of transport manager for the Greenwich Park venue, which hosts the equestrians. And then after that, I always been a digital technologist. And a few years earlier, I started implementing an innovative solution in the local authorities on how to manage data and control parking zones. And I started using, some of the most innovative products. And at the time, it used to be happened to be Autodesk, AutoCAD Map 3D. And so I started getting to know Autodesk, and immediately after the London Olympics, I got headhunted by them. So worked for Autodesk for quite a few years. It was a traveling job, managed the North for Europe, the technical pre-sales of the civil infrastructure solution. So spent there quite a few years, traveling a lot and supporting and a lot of companies that really wanted to innovate by adopting, new technology. And then in 2018, 17 actually, in the 17, I decided that it was time for me to do something else. And that's when I decided to set up my company. And that's what I've been doing for the last few years, been supporting customers. I'm always very fascinated where people approach me from. This is the great pleasure of working in a digital connected world. And I also, because of the pandemic, I kind of was a bit forced to relocate myself at the moment, at least temporary, in Australia. So these days I support series. It's kind of have two streams. One is supporting the large companies, like mostly civil engineering, oil and gas, built environment engineering firms that they want to adopt and innovate. And in this case, I have actually particular focus because, as you mentioned, I specialize in this new topic, and it's these digital twins. And so I support them with their digital twin strategy. And then I work for quite a lot of early stage companies. They have new products for the construction life cycle, and I help them to break to market. As you know, that is very, very challenging for new companies to break into the market. And I use my experience and my contacts and my network, which these days is really, really global. Basically I found the best, who, you know, might be the best company to start adopting and start, you know, implementing these new, testing these new products for the market.
Well, you've given me 3 different potential paths to go down. The first, let's go down the digital. It's
Okay.
like you were way ahead of your time implementing and understanding we're in an exponential and a digital world by the implementation of Autodesk, BIM, and so
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're a pioneer. And
Yeah. I think sometimes I go ask this question actually before, because sometimes I think you don't realize who you are until actually things happen. And then I think it's just my mindset. I really like efficiency and productivity. And for me, it's always, well, if there is a better way to do it, why don't we do it? So I always been this early adopter. And in fact, at the time, what really, you know, basically how I got to know Autodesk was the fact that I implemented this solution which was unseen in the private sector, but I did it in public sector, and I did it with no budget, at least like the same budget that had previously. So it was very good success stories. I actually became this UK case study with this time I have a video in 2010, so we're talking over 10 years ago, a full video with Autodesk and talking about the case studies. And I actually used to be their guest speaker at quite few events across UK. That became actually was using the Ordnance Survey, new products, which is the mapping map agency for UK, and I became the case study, for UK case study for that as well. So yes, I always been like this, and to be honest, I think he's also when it comes to the realization is what kind of is what I bring to the world, right? Which it's not always easy to be constantly on the innovation edge, but it's where I feel more comfortable. It's I'm naturally very curious, so if there is something new, I always try to test it, and this is just across not only the built environment, which is in the construction, which is obviously the industry we're working for over 20 years, but also on the everyday gadgets. I tend to test a lot of new gadgets.
So what's really fascinating is the construction industry is very slow to adapt. You could look at a construction site 80 years ago and it looks very similar to the one today.
It never changed.
Very little change. Not only are you a forward thinker and an innovator implementing technology, but you're a woman doing it. And that is a really interesting. Tell me how it's been, fighting, first of all, innovation and implementing new technologies, and then more in a traditionally masculine type industry as construction, being a thought leader and a visionary. So explain.
Okay, this is interesting because I actually didn't realize that for many years, in the sense that when I started my career and I had to decide what I wanted to study, I always been very good. I was very good at technical, everything was technical basically. Won a lot of math competitions, and when I, young age, and I was particularly good at tech. like technical drawings. So I decided that it was, it was a good career for me to become, building and land survey is a very honorable profession in Italy, very recognized. I'm actually passed the national exams. I'm, fully qualified. So yes, they were less. I was one of the few women at the school, right? But they really didn't really bother me that much in the sense that it's just one of the things. It's just, I don't know. I think for a few years, well, I'm the first of three girls, and yes, definitely my parents wanted a boy. Um, and yes, I do find occasionally some pictures of me when I was very little wearing boys' clothes, and I'm still not entirely sure if it was to do with, it was me wanted to wear them or not. But anyway, so for some reason, I always been the one fixing things in the house, and you know, definitely not the girly type. Let's put it that way. So it was just natural. What obviously came natural to me. So for many years, it really didn't really bother me that much. There were not really that many women. Actually, I used to talk to some of my friends in other industries, and they had a lot of like women competition, and I was just like, I love my industry because there is no that, right? It's just men are just very straightforward.
Get it done.
You miss it. So there are actually a lot of benefits there. Obviously arrived in UK, there was two barriers. I'd only been a woman, which actually lies well, maybe a bit more, even more unusual, where I didn't see that much in my country. In Italy, it was definitely more evident. In UK, I rarely came across another woman doing the same thing. And then I think is also when you start moving up, like the ladder and the management, there's definitely where I felt my gender. In my case, it was not just a gender; it was gender and being European. And I'm actually a very proud British citizen these days. And this week, obviously, UK is no longer in Europe. But certainly because of my accent, which definitely softened a little bit, had two barriers. And I always, when I talk to people, they always have to say, well, there are two barriers. Yeah, the first is I start talking and then you realize, no, obviously from, England, in this case here, not from Australia. And then the second barrier is, of course, you say, you see the fact that obviously I'm a woman. And so I have these two barriers before they see the professional. So there is a lot of bias that obviously comes with that. And if I could only get, a penny for every single time they ask me, a woman, why? Why do you do what you do? I mean, they just can't find. And it's strange because I always carry on. I was like, no, I've been reminded many times that and been told I don't belong. And I always say, but that's where I feel I belong. So should I care about what they think? Or should I just do what makes me happy? And then where maybe the peers and my colleagues kind of never really like that much, or they always, obviously I'm a big threat, or most of the time that's how they see me. But then what they see me is I always realized that I was bringing something that other people are not bringing, right? And there was a place for me. And in my case, I could not find enough reasons to change my industry. So I stick to it. And then there was actually a very important moment because I was at the time when I was at Autodesk, was probably 2013. I was in Dublin, in Ireland, and I was doing a presentation, and we had few students from the University of Technology there. And rarely you have students coming to these Autodesk Open events, but at the time we had these few students at the back. And during my presentation, I mentioned I had again my master's in civil engineering at Imperial College in London. And these two ladies came to the end of the presentation to talk to me, and one of them said, I just applied for the same course, can I stay in touch with you? I'm gonna move to London and so on. And then she say, I want to be you. And whereas yeah, so that was very unusual, because it was the first time I realized the importance of just me being out there. I certainly been a role model, being the oldest of three sisters for my younger sisters, but it never really occurred to me that could be also for other people and for other women in the industry. And what actually struck my attention at the time, which I just could not understand what she meant, is that in front of me I had this very young lady with this beautiful Irish accent, black hair, but wearing a scarf and clearly Muslim. In fact, their family is from Israel. So in that moment, you can see how I was just like, this is not possible. This is not happening. We are the most opposite, that you can think of. The only thing we have in common is that we are the same gender. So this woman with completely different religion, completely different country, completely different upbringing, somehow she relates to me. So I really understood the importance of taking a public stage, and me just being there attracts just a different type of women and people. They just say, well, if she's there, I can be there. And I think that is where where I decided from that moment never to turn down a public speaking event, which includes these days, these presentations too, right? And these days I get approached by a ridiculous amount of women across the globe. It could be UK, it could be Germany, it could be someone from Cuba. And obviously because of social media and because I've been very active and I decided not to shy away. And they is what basically been reinforcing, the message, and also the importance of just show that, we are all here for the same reasons, that you can look like, different. You can be a woman, you can have a funny accent, you can, have a different, type of upbringing, but what really matters is what you want to live and what you bring to the world. And sometimes, obviously, I ask myself if it's why I keep, carry on, when sometimes, people do tell you, that, perhaps I wasn't my career, or it wasn't, but then I think no, this is the place where I have to be. I mean, in July I received an email, and I'm actually going to talk to them tomorrow again. It's from Saudi Arabia, and I was very surprised to receive an invitation to speak to the board of a local company there, and sharing my knowledge and expertise on digital twins. But it's sometimes it's just, I'm one of the few women out there. I decided that it's important for me not to shy away. The fact that all the other women say, thank you for doing this, thank you for being our voice, thank you for for having this very important role. And I always say, well, I'm going to keep doing it, and then hopefully, and there are a lot more women. The last probably 10 years, I can see a lot more women. And they are probably just less shy. Yeah, less shy to just say, it's okay. I'm as knowledgeable as other people, and I have the same right to be there. For some reasons, I don't know. It's just we were designed differently. We are created differently. Wherever you want to decide where we come from, but we have just different per type of traits. And certainly for us, confidence than women confident, we're just tends to be less confident. But also, I think what I really realize is we just tends to be challenged a lot more. It's just, my partner is in the same industry, right? He never gets challenged because he does what he does, but I always do. So also, that confidence comes with the fact that if you constantly get asked, why are you doing what you're doing? Eventually you ask yourself, are they right? You can understand. And it takes a lot of strength, internal strength to actually say, you know what, I'm actually going to do what makes me happy. And this is my role. And this is what I do. And this is what I want to leave when, to the world. I always say, what do you want to, what's, your mission and what you want to do. And I just say, well, I want to make the world a better place. I want to leave it in a better place than, how want to leave it a better place than, I was born into. So I want to really, make my significant contribution. And yes, I've been, blessed that it's not only the construction industry and pushing for the innovation in one of the most important society. We couldn't live without construction. We all live in houses right now, and became, from this year they became our offices where we work most of the time, workplaces. And we need our, the buildings, we need the infrastructures, we need transport, we need hospitals, we need education facilities. We can't function as a society without the built environment. And then very often and there is actually there was a news yesterday, just last night here in Australia, another construction company went bankrupt. And people don't realize how important, and this is going to keep happening, because the way how we procuring built assets has been the same forever. And we are talking of such a long life cycles. All our, objects and a lot of other, industries, the life cycle is very short. For us, it's overpass our existence most of the time. So, and in the way how we be procuring, and the fact that we have the budget, capex and opex, and how fragmented the industry is, the contracts, management, and the fact that everyone always looks at their little bit. There is just the coordination of it is just complex. It's a very complex industry.
And you bring up a really good point. You brought up so many good points, and I want to somewhat jump in a few times to really dive deep. But what if you look at Airbnb, the person who started Airbnb or Uber, the person who started Uber wasn't in the cab company, wasn't a cab company. Airbnb wasn't a hotel chain. You have to have an outside perspective. And once again, I think your outside perspective, being a female, being a technologist, you looked at it perpendicular to the way most people were doing it. And I want to kind of transition into, not only are you a pioneer from a female in a heavily dominated male, culture, but you're also a pioneer and a thought leader in this concept of a digital twin. I've got a little bit of exposure when I worked at Caterpillar with the digital twin and our construction equipment. But can you tell me a little bit about your thoughts of the digital twin? As you say, these assets will last many generations, and how you formulated this concept or associated the concept of the digital twin into the built environment.
Okay, so it's interesting. I'm going to tell you where it all started, at least for me.
Okay.
And it was actually August, and it was August 2017, actually. I was, yes, it was August 2018. And it was the 14th of August, and I already started my company. I was working with SMEs, actually been in the market for over a year or so, offering a new common data environment, yeah, for the for the life cycles of our buildings and infrastructure. And that morning, the bridge, the Morandi Bridge in north of Italy collapsed. Yeah, and my heart sank because it's not too far away from where I was born. That's the route you take to go to the seaside. That's the route I took, and a very important bridge that you obviously go through, because it was just, we used to call it the Brooklyn Bridge, because you know how it's called. So I always have these childhood memories. And then, so that morning, honestly, for me, it was a bit of an eye opener, because and definitely reinforced to what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And I always say, this is unacceptable. Any of my family members, any of people, the people I love could have been on that bridge that morning. And as a construction professional, being in this space, especially working in civil infrastructure for so many years, to just accept that something like this can happen, I just can't live with myself, right? And I'm really, really sorry for those 42 people who died that morning. And certainly we know as a construction professional that that's not unusual. I mean, these things happen. Bridges keeps collapsing, especially in US. We have to, all the entire, infrastructure, civil infrastructure was not really designed, to carry out, or was not maintained properly, was not really designed to carry out, so many journeys, so many people, and such a, population growth. But we normally can see that and predict that from happening. The fact that it would just happened, in such a big, way, it was, definitely, it was heartbroken for, it was just really too much. So from that moment, I start actually looking at, so what could have prevented that from happening? Yeah. And what I found fascinating is all of these videos of these simulations. They happen, and you could see all these simulation on how maybe it could happen because of this, or maybe the structure collapsed because of this, something else. And there were all this type of simulation, and I was like, hold on, why was not this done before and prevent this from happening? This is just unacceptable. So anyway, so this is where really the topic start kicking in for me, and that is when I was kind of like, and start understanding this concept of digital twins, which at the time there was not really much research, especially on the built environment. A concept, who's been around for 15 years, cloned for the manufacturing product, life cycle. So not born for our industry, but you can understand the concept, right? The fact that the advancement in technology allows you to connect a digital replica or a virtual replica to his physical counterpart, and you can, these days we have a lot of IoT devices or whatever you want to connect it, and and sensors that you can do that. Of course, quite challenging for our built, assets. It's not exactly you can put and monitor absolutely everything. Also because the majority of our assets already been built, right? So anyway, so it's just, it was definitely challenging in the beginning to trying to understand a bit of this concept. So as I was researching, I was actually invited to do an evening lecture by the Bartlett School of Construction in London. And I discovered it was actually a live streamed lecture. And I decided to do it on a topic that at the time people were not really talking that much. And I thought it was definitely I wanted to start sharing my experience on what I was learning, what I was researching, and
Mhm.
how perhaps this new concept could have, help us and change us. And it actually happened to be the same week as the Gemini Principle being published in UK. So Mark Hansen, the CTO of Mott, actually happened to notice I was going to do this lecture, and he approached me and said, "I'm going to send you this embargo copy so you can talk about it on your lecture." And from then, there was a bit of this combination. I was one of the few people talking about this concept and started doing a bit of research, and then it kind of like exploded from there. And then it led to a publication, because I sit on the built environment panel of the Institute of Engineering and Technology in London. And so they asked me, well, let's try to define, what a digital twin for the built environment is and how it can help. And basically that's been my life for the last few years. And these days, that's what most people ask me to share my knowledge on. It actually happened this way. It wasn't. It was just this natural path.
Well, and you say it's natural, but it's your journey through Autodesk that has not only the built environment, but they also have the manufacturing with their mechanical drawing software. So, you seem to be putting pieces together, and you're very good at associative thinking. So, what are some, you mentioned the benefit of simulation and looking at it before, but can you tell some of the other potential benefits, especially when you build a building today? Things are going to change very rapidly over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years because of these exponential technologies. So talk about some of the benefits of having a digital twin for your asset. And I've listened to some of your talks. You refer to them more as assets as opposed to buildings, because it's more than buildings.
Infrastructure, it could be
right.
oil and gas pipe, could be infrastructure, it could be anything.
Yes.
So I developed my own view. So these days, it's been since the Gemini Principle, since UK. UK, huge amount of work done by the Central Digital Britain. In US now, we have the Digital Twin Consortium, which, not surprisingly, actually, a lot of the founders are not, they are IBM, General Electric, so they, and Microsoft. So not necessarily where the same industry, because there are these digital twins are only for the built environment. It can be for a lot of other industries are already implementing this. So there is a lot of definitions out there, and probably how the built information modeling process came, to our, industry. There's going to be a lot of years on talking about what it is, what is not, what should be considered, what is not. So I kind of developed my own view. And the way I like to explain it is digital twins is just another technological advancement. Yeah, I started from drawing boards. I wouldn't think twice about starting a drawing, on a drawing board, so a design and drawing board these days. Would you? No, not many people would, unless you have a lot of time and you are looking more for the artistical, side. But you wouldn't, right? So we will all start immediately design digitally because why? Because it's easy to edit, it's easy to amend, it's easy, it's to send to other people to share, it's easy to calculate, we can automate many of the aspects, right? Digital twins is the same. It's the simple ability. We've been designing this 3D and also digital replica, because the digital twins not necessarily needs to be have a 3D digital equivalent. You can actually have a full digital twin just with a 2D. So what is important is have this digital representation of the built asset, but not on its own. Yeah, because we've already been doing this for how many years? Yeah, the advancement is the ability to connect and monitor, the physical and link the physical to the digital. That's really is the technological innovation, which wasn't possible years ago. Now it's possible. Now we can start creating these replicas, yeah, and there is still a lot of discussion on when we should call them digital twins and when we should not call them digital twins. Should we call them digital twins before, during the capex phase, before the asset is even built, yeah, during the design phase, or should we just call it digital replica and then call them digital twins when actually we connect to the physical asset? I always say, does it really matter? What is really important is the outcome, right? So if we're thinking about the opportunity to, we can do already design digitally and engineer digitally a lot of aspects. Wherever you see an infrastructure, you see a building during the design phase, we can already start simulating, yeah, and linking all those important aspects that, and gathers all of this data, collect all of this data, and making sure all this information passed through the entire life cycle. And I always see the digital twin as probably one of the biggest opportunity is finally bridge the gap between capex and opex, because we know how the two, phases are managed these days, which is they're disconnected, right? Once over it's whatever building infrastructure is over, then asset management kicks in. Would they ever consider how it was designed in the first place and what was? No, because they've been maintaining assets for many, many, many years. Most of the time, it's never one person, but a group of, is a team of people that changes constantly who manage, the asset. So there is no really consistency, right? So what they do, it is based on obviously their experience in managing assets, but most of the time doesn't really have an asset. So, or doesn't have, look at the history. So look at and think about the Grenfell Tower, yeah, which I was in London and it was a horrible night, yeah. It was absolutely terrible to witness something like this. It's still completely changing the construction, landscape in, in UK, because what come out of that. But you can really see how the information wasn't passed through, right? And now these days we talk about the golden thread, of this information. This information, it's important, and these days, we collect it digitally. If we collect it digitally, we can link it together. We can create, rules. We can query this data, and we can make sure this data goes through the entire life cycle. So let's think. You asked me, what is these days, one of the very big, benefits. Well, let's think. Obviously, on a smaller scale, perhaps, will we see digital twins of our houses and the small dwellings? Yes, you can. Probably the benefits and the cost of maintaining those. Perhaps some elements are important, but some elements, as you can imagine, you see the benefits in the scalability. But think about the big towers, yeah? These big. This year, the pandemic has been the biggest facility management, nightmare, right? Because these assets have been maintained and designed in one, and I've been, operating in a certain way. This year completely changed. So 1 or 2 years of not used in the same way as been used before, what would it produce? Yeah, the consequences and the fact that it's not easy to assess what elements you still need to change because they are not being used in the same way, which ones you change, which ones you replace, which ones you're like, well, I'm going to wait before the break. Obviously, there is, a lot of changes in destination of use. Yeah, some of these big towers, perhaps, in the big cities, they will never go back to being offices. They might be converted into residentials, right? Or to different type of use, so shared spaces. People are going to start using offices in a completely different way. So think about the opportunity. If all of these big, whatever buildings or infrastructure have this digital, counterpart connected to physical asset that you can just query, you can analyze, you can understand better that, just not having it. Yeah. So it's like anything. It's like we have the opportunity now, technology is advanced to a level where we can do more with the technologies that are available. And the construction industry is now the least digitalized industry, and with the lowest profit margin, second only to agriculture. So the only way is to innovate. Otherwise, who is going to build this world? Who is going to maintain our infrastructure? We have to innovate. We have to do better. It's complex. It's a very, very, very huge complex task. But there is, what other options do we have? I think even like this year, it's with this pandemic and the current situation, digital is enhanced to a completely different level. These days, it's perfectly fine to do inspections on cameras, on using our smartphones and using all of this digital, this technology, right? So it's what always fascinates me, and I struggle because, as I share my life with actually a rail engineer, but what it really fascinates me all the time is on our everyday life. We use a lot of technology, from smartphones to having access, and from using a lot of apps and tools. But when it comes to our everyday job in our construction, we just say, well, yeah, that's the way it is, right? We kind of have this sort of acceptance in the industry, and people just don't ask, and they just don't question it, and just say, oh, it's just too hard to change. Of course, because we have one element that many other industry perhaps don't have. We are, it's a very risk adverse industry. Who is taking the risk? Who is accepting this risk of implementing a new technology untested, most of the time, which could have safety implications, because anything that we do in construction has, some sort of safety implication. So what do? You carry on the way you always done it. And this is what we've been doing now for so long. And that is always, get asked why the industry, get to this point. And I was like, because as an executive of a company, I've been, on those meetings where you sit there, in front of the executive board, and who needs to make the decision, adopt a new technology. It's very hard to give the evidence back and say, you know what, I think this is what's going to happen. Because most of the time, you need some early adopters. But to have some early adopters, you need to find the most innovative companies who have spare cash, which most of the time don't have, to start being the early adopter with the potential to start adopting, this company, is this product mainstream, internally. But it's kind of this very, very, challenges, loop that, we got into it. It's adopting technology into the construction. It's tough. And I think, to actually go back to one of your early comments, that you say, oh, well, Uber and other, companies were actually started by people with a completely different insight from other industries. So it's interesting, because I actually, here and then I come across and I get approached by early stage companies from people that are not from an industry, right? And then they get fascinated in why it's so difficult to sell in this construction industry. And then just say, but it's impossible. And I was like, yes, it's challenging. It's not impossible. It's a very, very challenging. Most of the time, you need to know the people. You need to have built those relationships for a very long time. You need to, you already need to have some like wins and just say, you know what, I think this could work. I think you should really look into it. And the reality is, some founders, I actually realized, they pivot and they make the product for a different industry, which has better chances of being adopted rather than sticking to construction, because for them is survival, right? They have an amount of cash and revenue they have to generate, otherwise they run out before everyone else. So before they make it, right? So they have no option. And how do you fix that? How do you fix that?
Exactly. And
it's challenging.
It's very challenging because, like you say, when you're in an industry, you have blinders on. That is the world you know. And when you come from outside, you have a whole different perspective. So with all this mountain of data, taking this data and, there's a gentleman, I can't remember who said it, but they said we went from things being complicated to complex. Complicated, a human could, somewhat wrap their arms around it and understand all the data. There's so much data now, it's complex. And you used the word complex several times. When things are so complex, you need to have an AI, artificial intelligence. I like to call it augmented intelligence, because you need the human and the computer for the insights. Can you talk a little bit about, is AI being used to help manage all this data and to glean those insights?
Well, it's as I said, it's now is I think one of the challenges that we have is we're create these days, we exchange through our entire life cycle a huge amount of data and digital data. The challenge is not only sharing the data, is make sense of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely artificial intelligence and machine learning can help with that, right? If there is a way to create and start, running and just start to understand and say, what, if we put all the historical data, all of this part of, our asset, and based on historical, data, this should be, instead of doing ad hoc, maintenance, we can doing in a more predictive, productive way. Because what I found fascinating is sometimes I spoke to some facility managers, and they say, well, we can't really afford that part. Obviously breaks down. We know from experience that needs to be replaced every few years, right? Because it's a very important component. What about if we have the opportunity to actually do this, predictive, maintenance a bit more accurately? So especially now that our assets our assets have changed, right? And is there a way, to put that? So let's think, it's the same. We put all the historical data. Let's put an example of one of our big office towers, and we just say, well, we used to change and maintain some elements of the buildings, every certain time. What we'll do if now, with the fact that the building is no use, is there a way to actually attach some sensors to some part of of the asset, so we can actually predict when this happens, right? We can see at the changes, we can monitor on some of the structural changes and say, what, we're going to do it when it's necessary, and perhaps it can carry on for a lot longer than we think. So it's very important to be able to monitor our asset more efficiently, and that we've been doing now, because we just don't have a choice. It's just, we don't have the money anymore and the resources necessary to maintain what we have, to refurbish what we have, and to meet the global demand, population demand growth. So who is going to pay for all of this? As a taxpayer, we don't want to pay more, right? Mm-hmm. We already pay enough taxes, whatever country you want to see. So you're like, well, actually, as we are all users of our built environment, we should be the one and the drivers and just say, you know what, I want new technologies to be adopted. I want the new technology to be used. And if digital twins is this, this new type of technology, it's adopted in every other industry, perhaps it can do, bit of help in our industry too, right? Perhaps we're never really going to be adopted the same as manufacturing or some of the elements, right? With very, very short, streamlined life cycle. But definitely we can do better than what we have now. We have to. So as we are the users of the built environment, we have to look at that and just say and be the drivers. And that's how I see it. It's like, well, no, because if I help my company to innovate, I help my company to be more productive, more efficiently, then ultimately the other benefits in the moment we start, let's think about how we monitor our buildings, and think about the data that is going to be available for future generation to see how we've been using our assets and how perhaps that is going to change all our design manuals. Some of the how many years takes to get any changes to any of the design manuals, and sometimes we know they're out of date. We know that there is yes, that's how it used to be done, but the reality is that as a construction professional, most of the time you put your signature, you're liable, right, for whatever you're building and you're designing, and you're like, well, I have to comply with that standard, I have to comply even if it's 10-15 years out of date, right? So let's think about actually the fact and the way how we can start monitoring, gather all this collective data, make sense of it, and kind of go a full loop and be able to analyze this data from the design aspect and being able to monitor, change, and improve how we build and design assets in the future.
Do you think it's going to take a company from outside the construction industry? Do you think it's going to be an IBM or a McKinsey or a Autodesk that will come in that understand data and monitoring data, but yet still peripherally understand the built environment, and that truly know data and how to find value within the data? And it'll be interesting to see if you find companies in your consultancy, the BYs, that are data experts, that are, these really smart data people that have a little bit of background in the construction, that create a company that will then take all this mountain of data and turn it into gold for not only the building owner, but for themselves. So what's your thoughts on, will it be a construction company or an oil and gas company, or will it be an outsider that comes in and harvests?
I think it depends who you're asking this question to. I think everyone will give you a completely different answer. And my answer is no, it's not going to be, I don't see a Uber. I don't see, one of these outsider companies completely revolutionary our built environment, because the way I see it is, yes, you see companies that they know how to analyze data very well. Yeah. So Microsoft has this, digital twin offering. It's nothing to do with 3D visualization. If you go down to, the big Autodesk or Bentley and other software vendors, where it's more about the 3D and the visualization of this digital twin, right? But each one of them has the reason to exist, and each one of them has this place in the world. The reality is, one company is expert at something and has the knowledge, perhaps analyzing the data and make sense of it a bit better. But then if you don't know the industry and its complex life cycle and how it works, it's very difficult to untangle. So I see companies that are doing very well on one side, but then without the construction industry, they struggle, because they're like, well, I really want to help here, but you know what? It's too complicated. I'm going to help someone else, right? Because at the same time, they need to generate, the revenue itself, and perhaps there is not an incentive. We need to understand that for us, For the built environment, we're looking for long-term return of investment. Yeah, companies, financials, most of the time look
Quarter
at
to quarter.
short
Yeah.
term. Yeah. So how do you balance the two? Challenging. What I see is perhaps here is maybe we can see the public sector coming into, having a much stronger place and be maybe the stronger driver on these regards. Why? Because they're the ones who need to maintain the assets for a very, very, very long time, and they have this long-term vision. They're not driven by short-term goals, but like long-term goals. So definitely, in fact, not surprisingly, the UK is driving a UK national digital twin, right? Which is obviously to do with the billions spent in UK infrastructure. And of course, it makes sense when you maintain them for so many years. Of course, building them digitally makes sense and maintaining them digitally makes sense. So you can see where the public sector perhaps has, because of the public good, right? We have much, much more, like voice, yeah, on trying to address the long-term return on investment. The short term, unfortunately, and as a private company, it's challenging. It's challenging to address and trying to combine the two, because as I said, it depends on what part of the life cycle you're looking into it. There are completely different companies. Everyone is good at different things. But I always say one thing. So for me, certainly, I see as a combination, as a collective effort. And I think these days and this year, we have exactly, the world has shown us that when we put our collective resources together, we can achieve the impossible. Yeah, years and years ago, nobody thought we could have come up with a vaccine in such a short time, but we did. Yeah, and perhaps even if it's so challenging, it's going to take forever and a long generation to recover. The fact that I spoke to my friends that work in the pharmaceutical industry, and they just said, we've never seen something like this. The amount of sharing between countries, of course, not everyone was willing to share, but the amount of sharing, the collaboration, and just look for the public good is just not about the pharma was going to make it, it's going to make the money. It's about the fact that we have a collective duty of care to the rest of the world, make sure our family and friends, get through this and they don't die, right? Or they don't die in hospital. So what about if we would do the same for our built environment? What about if once for all, we actually put our resources together and we say, you know what, we need to do this. We have to do it. The challenge is also how do you approach it? Do you approach it for country? Do you prefer geographical, area? For how do you do it? Because one of the other biggest challenges is building, creating and producing a glass in one country is the same as the other country. For built assets, unique characteristics and unique standards, unique local standard, unique language, unique, everything is unique. How do you standardize that, right? How do you, which also comes with a link of how you link the asset and data together and all of this gigantic amount of data. But the reality is, most of the time, it's about data, but it's about numbers, right? Numbers are the same, whatever language, whatever. So we can already do better. What I probably see is we can't do perhaps a huge, massive and have this perfect digital twin of our built asset in all its completeness, but we can definitely take that, frustration and look for continuous improvement rather than just creating, this unicorn view, how sometimes they're trying to sell it. So I will say, to answer your question, it's I can see it as a maybe collective effort, like a combination of companies that they want to come together and just say, you know what, you know a lot about construction, you are global, you definitely have a driver to do better. We understand a lot better about data. We've been doing this for many, many years. Maybe we can do something together. Could be there. We definitely see the implementation of digital twins and getting into the policies of countries and local policies. Australia, it started implementing and creating these digital twins for some aspects, for example, of Sydney. And so you can see how this has already been used, right? And we can definitely see some pocket of excellence, still not mainstreams. And I would say, I think we should look for that this is the direction where we should try to go towards to, right? Maybe it's nothing we're never going to achieve 100%, but just thinking that that's what the direction we should go, it's already a huge improvement and already a lot more than what we have now.
Cristina, what a great way to end it. What a pleasure speaking with you. Could probably carry on this conversation for another couple hours. And we'll definitely get back in touch with you to carry on the conversation. Thank you so much on behalf of Drastic Summit. Thank you. What an amazing journey, story, and congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you for having